Welcome to True Crime with Shannon. I'm Shannon. Today we're here to talk about the case of Helen Clevenger. Back in 2008, I was briefly living in Hendersonville, North Carolina. It was while living in Western North Carolina that I became enthralled in a murder case that happened in nearby Asheville back in July of 1936. Locals are very familiar with the building in which the crime took place. It was the Battery Park Hotel, which is now known as the Battery Park Apartments, which is a retirement facility. The building actually has quite a history in and of itself. Many have claimed that the Battery Park is haunted. Multiple suicides have taken place, including two notable ones in 1943 and again in 1972. Neither left notes to indicate why they leapt to their deaths. Most recently, on December 13th of 2015, during construction on the building, a part of the support mechanism for scaffolding holding workers up near the 13th floor suddenly snapped, leaving two men dangling from the side as well as knocking out power to a portion of downtown Asheville. Incredibly, no one was seriously injured or died. The most notorious case that occurred at the Battery Park was the murder of a college student from Staten Island, New York. Helen Clevenger was traveling with her uncle, William Billy Clevenger, that summer in 1936. Helen and her uncle had returned to the hotel after dinner and each resided to their respective rooms for the evening. That night, a terrible electrical storm surged through the Blue Ridge Mountains, filling the sky with lightning and loud claps of thunder. During that storm, a guest staying in a room across from Helen was awakened by what he thought was a gunshot. He bolted up in bed and called down to the front desk. The tired house detective, Daniel Gaddy, told the concerned guest that he would come up to check into their concern. Mr. Gaddy headed up and walked the hallway, listening a bit, but came to the conclusion that the sound the guest heard must have been a boom from the crazy storm outside. At daybreak the next morning, Mr. William Clevenger knocked on his niece's room door to awaken her. After not receiving an answer, he pushed through the unlocked door and came upon a grisly sight. Helen was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, her face brutally beaten, and a visible gunshot was present to her breast. Near the young woman's body, there was a .32 caliber bullet casing. Police were immediately dispatched to the scene and began an investigation. Who could have done this to the young college girl? Authorities questioned all the hotel guests present. A number of possible suspects became detained. Among them were the uncle, William Clevenger, as well as Daniel Gaddy, the house detective. A local violinist, Mark Wallner, originally from Germany, currently residing in Asheville, would also be brought in by detectives after learning he was present the evening of the murder. Mr. Wallner was quickly cleared as he was with a date and his alibi proved his innocence. Mr. Clevenger and Mr. Gaddy were also soon cleared by the investigators after looking into their alibis. Police, including Chief William Everett, believed that the murder was an inside job. They were sure it was done by someone who was familiar with the hotel and knew their way around. Detectives interrogated 60 members of the hotel staff, and suspicion quickly centered upon two young black bellhops, Joe Uray and L.D. Rowdy. Both men swore they didn't do it and were innocent. The only real clues investigators had were the bullet casing found near Helen's body and reports of a lanky man seen vaulting 15 feet from the hotel balustrade in the middle of the night. NYPD sent two top detectives to Asheville on August 7, 1936 to aid the investigation. Thomas Martin was a 28-year police veteran and was known as the best homicide man in the world by his boss, as well as John Quinn Jr. Upon arrival, detectives learned from the hotel cook that hotel employee Martin Moore owned a .32 revolver. Upon learning of this information, Moore was immediately brought into interrogation with police. Moore denied involvement in the murder, but later led detectives to the gun, which was wrapped in burlap and tucked into a crawl space under his house. Police immediately rushed the gun to the NYPD lab in Brooklyn, where hairs judged similar to that of Helen Clevenger were said to be found on the weapon. It was then that Sheriff Lawrence Brown made the announcement to the public that Moore had confessed, having written a 700-word confession to the crime. "I got scared," Moore was quoted as saying. "I figured she was not in the room, but when I got in, she was there and she screamed. That's why I shot her." Soon after the confession, Moore swore he was coerced into making said confession by investigators. He said Chief Brown forced him to confess, and a fat man from New York beat him with a rubber hose. He was referencing Quinn. 4 days later, psychiatrist Dr. Mark Griffin stated Moore confessed to him that he murdered Helen Clevenger. Moore was then indicted and placed on trial for murder on August 19th of 1936. This entire process took 11 days from the time Moore had given up the gun to authorities. Moore's attorney, J. Scroop Stiles, attempted to argue against the confession that he gave to police. The lawyer stated that Moore was an ill-educated young man who found himself in a vulnerable situation. Moore, as well as some family, would also testify that he was at a birthday party during the time of the murder, so he couldn't have done it. Judge John Phillips decided the confession was not obtained under any kind of duress, and therefore it was admissible in court. This aided state prosecutor Zeb Nettles to convince an all-white jury to return with a guilty verdict within the hour of deliberations. Moore was sentenced to death in the North Carolina gas chamber. His sentence was carried out on December 11th, 1936, just 5 months after the murder of Helen Clevenger. The murder of Helen Clevenger was nationally covered through the media in many newspapers, and even garnered international press coverage in London and other European publications. The racial prejudice of the period was conspicuous, and Moore's physical appearance was regularly emphasized. The case was also later dramatized in True Detective magazine, as well as other true crime magazines. A radio drama also came out on the case, which was approved by the sheriff. It aired in April and July of 1936. Years later, a play was written in 2014. So, those are the facts of the case, at least the facts that we have been told throughout the years. I initially wanted to write a story, a true crime novel on this crime. Like I said, in 2008, I was living in Hendersonville, and this case sort of just came to me after I was just intrigued by the Battery Park apartments, formerly the hotel. But after doing a lot of research, there wasn't a lot of information still on file, considering it was such a long ago crime and case. And again, I believe the racial prejudice of the time took a deep play into all the situation. There's just something about the murder of Helen Clevenger that doesn't sit right with me. I personally, I don't believe that Martin Moore killed her. I believe that there is some kind of other something going on, whether it was the house detective, some other employee on the property, or what have you. It just felt like they rushed to judgment on this man, and as far as I'm concerned, he just did not get a fair trial. And considering that it was 5 months from the time of the murder till he was sentenced to death, I mean that's quite a speedy trial and punishment for any time. I want to thank you for checking out my podcast. Please come back, and I will have more stories coming up. And I'm always taking suggestions, so please feel free to let me know if you have any cases you would love me to cover. Thank you very much for checking out True Crime with Shannon.